The morning light spilled softly through the dusty diner windows, painting the tables in a warm golden glow. The place smelled of coffee, pancakes, and tired hope, the kind that kept people going when they didn't have much else. Behind the counter, a young woman named Emily wiped the same spot for the third time. She wasn't really cleaning anymore. She was just trying to keep her hands busy. At 22, Emily already felt twice her age. She was 5 months pregnant, her feet always sore, and sleep had become a luxury. The baby was due in early spring, but the bills were due every week, and those couldn't wait. She worked double shifts whenever she could, even though the manager warned her to take it easy. Taking it easy didn't pay rent, though the diner wasn't fancy. It was the kind of place that had peeling wallpaper and a jukebox that only worked when you gave it a gentle kick. Still, regular customers loved it because it felt familiar. Truck drivers came in for coffee refills, old couples split pancakes, and tired students studied at the corner booth. Emily liked the customers. Most were kind, and some even asked about her baby. But some days kindness felt like a luxury she couldn't afford to expect. That morning had been slow. She had just finished serving a group of travelers when the door opened, and a man walked in quietly. She noticed him right away, not because he was famous, but because he carried himself differently. He didn't rush, didn't look at his phone, and when he smiled, it was genuine, not forced. "Good morning," Emily said, trying to sound cheerful even though her back ached. "Morning," the man replied softly, taking off his jacket and sliding into a booth near the window. There was something peaceful about him. His clothes were simple, a plain black jacket, jeans, and old boots. He looked like someone who had seen the world but didn't let it harden him. Emily didn't recognize him at first. He seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place where she'd seen that face before. She handed him a menu and asked, "Can I get you something to drink?" He smiled politely. "Just coffee, please, black." His voice was calm and kind. Emily nodded and poured him a cup, setting it gently in front of him. "Here you go," she said. "Thank you," he replied, meeting her eyes. There was warmth there, not the kind people give when they're being polite, but the kind that says, "I see you and I mean it." It had been a long time since anyone had looked at Emily that way. Most people saw the uniform, the tired eyes, the small belly showing under her apron. Some gave her pitying looks. Others just looked away. But this man's gaze was different. She tried not to stare as he studied the menu. She could tell he wasn't picky. He ordered eggs, toast, and bacon, and simple food. When she brought his plate, he thanked her again, and even though she'd heard those words 1,000 times from customers, this time they felt sincere. As he ate, a couple of customers began whispering. That's when Emily finally realized who he was. Her heart skipped. It was Keanu Reeves. She almost dropped the pot of coffee she was holding. Of course, now it made sense. The gentle voice, the calm presence, the quiet way he carried himself. She'd seen his movies before. But seeing him here, sitting alone at her table, was something else entirely. Her first instinct was to panic. What do you say to someone like him? What if she said something silly? But then she remembered something her mother once told her. Famous or not, everyone's human. So she treated him just like anyone else. Still, her mind kept racing as she refilled coffee for other customers. She couldn't help but think how strange it was. Life brought people together in the most unexpected ways. Here she was, struggling to make ends meet, and across the room sat one of the most loved actors in the world, drinking diner coffee from a chipped mug. As she passed his table again, he looked up and said, "The food's great. You make a good cup of coffee." Emily laughed softly. "Thank you, but I just pour it." "The beans do most of the work," he smiled. "Still, you pour it well." For a moment her worries melted away. It was such a small thing, but it mattered. When life is heavy, small kindnesses can feel like sunlight breaking through clouds. She tried to focus on her work, but thoughts kept swirling in her head. She thought about the rent due in 2 days, the baby clothes she still hadn't bought, and the doctor's appointment she might have to cancel if her paycheck didn't stretch far enough. At one point, she glanced toward Keanu's table. He was looking out the window, lost in thought. There was something almost lonely about him, though not in a sad way, more like someone who had learned to be comfortable in silence. Emily envied that peace. She hadn't felt calm in months. When he finished eating, she walked over with the check and set it down gently. "Whenever you're ready," she said. He nodded, pulling out his wallet. She noticed he didn't have the usual air of someone rich or entitled. He was just humble. As he counted the bills, something inside Emily stirred. She didn't know why, but she felt like she wanted to say something. Not about his fame, not even about herself, but something honest. She wanted to tell him that his kindness, even in small gestures, mattered. But how do you tell someone that without sounding strange? Her hand trembled slightly as she stood there thinking. Maybe she could write something small, just a few words. Something that came from her heart. She reached into her apron pocket and took out a pen. On the back of the receipt, she began to write. She didn't plan the words. They just flowed. Thank you for being kind. I'm trying my best. I hope my baby gets a better life than I did. She stared at the message for a long moment. It wasn't much. Just a few honest words, but they carried everything she'd been feeling. Exhaustion, hope, and quiet strength. Her throat tightened as she handed the receipt to him. She tried to smile, though her eyes glistened slightly. Here you go. Have a nice day, she said softly. He looked up and smiled. You too, he replied. Emily turned quickly, not wanting him to see her blush. She walked back behind the counter, pretending to check the coffee machine, though her hands trembled. She didn't know if he'd read the note right away or later. Part of her hoped he wouldn't. Maybe he'd just see it and think nothing of it. Maybe it would end there. A few minutes passed. Keanu stood up quietly, leaving money on the table, more than enough for the meal. He glanced toward the counter, gave her a small nod, and walked out the door. The diner bell chimed softly as he left. Emily exhaled. For a moment, everything felt still. When she went to clear the table, she noticed the tip. It was generous, far more than she expected. But what caught her off guard was the way he had folded the bills neatly, as if showing respect even in the smallest gesture. Underneath, the receipt she'd written on was gone. That simple act of taking the note with him made her heart race. He'd read it. As the day went on, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what she'd done. She felt embarrassed, maybe even foolish. What if it made him uncomfortable? What if he thought she was just looking for sympathy? But deep down, something told her that wasn't how he'd see it. There was something about his eyes, the way he listened without judgment, that gave her hope. When the sun began to set, the diner grew quiet again. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Emily rubbed her belly gently, whispering to her unborn baby, "We'll be okay. Somehow we'll be okay." She didn't know it yet, but the man she had served that morning would remember her words long after leaving the diner, and in a world full of noise and distraction, that small, handwritten message would touch something deep inside him, something that would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Outside, the sky turned orange and pink, the kind of colors that give you hope even on hard days. Emily leaned against the counter, tired but strangely at peace. Maybe she thought life had a way of sending angels disguised as ordinary people. That night she walked home with sore feet but a lighter heart. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in a while, she felt that maybe, just maybe, the universe hadn't forgotten about her. And somewhere, miles away, a man named Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his car, unfolding a small receipt with a few heartfelt words written in ink, words that would soon move him to act in a way that would restore faith in kindness once again. The next morning started, like any other day for Emily, but something in the air felt different. Maybe it was just the cool breeze sneaking in through the diner's half-open window, or maybe it was the quiet memory of the man from yesterday that lingered in her thoughts. She moved a little slower than usual, rubbing her tired back as she tied her apron. The baby had been kicking more lately, a tiny heartbeat of life that reminded her why she kept going. She was exhausted, but giving up was never an option. The diner looked the same. Worn booths, the smell of coffee and bacon, the hum of an old refrigerator that never stopped rattling. Still, something about it felt lighter today, as if hope had quietly taken a seat at one of the tables. Emily tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept replaying what had happened the day before. She kept seeing his face, calm, kind, the way he'd smiled when she handed him the coffee. And then, the way he'd looked at her when she gave him that receipt. She had no idea what he thought when he read it. Maybe he felt sorry for her. Maybe he didn't even read it until later. Either way, she couldn't stop thinking about it. As the morning rush began, she pushed those thoughts aside. Orders came in, coffee poured, plates clattered. Everything went on as usual. but deep down a quiet part of her hoped she'd see him again. By noon, the diner began to slow down. The usual lunchtime crowd had come and gone, leaving behind crumbs and coffee rings. Emily finally had a moment to rest her feet. She leaned against the counter, sipping water from a paper cup, when her manager, Mr. Brooks, came out of the back office. He was holding something in his hand in a small brown envelope. "Hey, Emily," he called, his tone softer than usual. "Got a second?" She straightened up quickly. "Yes, sir." Mr. Brooks looked at her with a strange expression. Not annoyed, not angry, but almost curious. "Did you serve a man yesterday morning? Tall guy, dark hair, quiet type?" Emily's heart skipped. Yes. I remember him. Why?" Mr. Brooks held out the envelope. "He left this for you." Her breath caught. "For me?" "Yeah," he said. "Came by early this morning before we opened. Said it was important that you get this." Emily wiped her hands nervously on her apron and took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. There was no name, just her own written neatly across the front. Her name, in handwriting that wasn't familiar. "Did he say what it's about?" she asked softly. Mr. Brooks shook his head. "No, just said it was personal. Didn't seem like a complaint or anything, more like, well, a gift." Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a check. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount. She blinked, thinking she must have read it wrong. But no, and the number was clear. It wasn't just a tip. It was enough to change everything. Her voice came out as a whisper. This can't be right." Mr. Brooks leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "He said it was for you. Told me to make sure you got it personally." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I can't take this. It's too much." Mr. Brooks gave her a kind look, one she didn't see often. He insisted. "Said something about people needing help sometimes and that you'd know what it meant." She looked back down at the note in her hands. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in neat handwriting. "Keep your head up. You're stronger than you think. You and your baby deserve peace," that was all. But it was enough to break the dam she'd been holding inside her for months. Tears streamed down her face before she could stop them. She covered her mouth, afraid to make a sound. Mr. Brooks stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Take a break, kid. You've earned it." She nodded, unable to speak. Emily went outside, standing near the back door of the diner. The air was warm, and the noise of cars passing by filled the street. She looked down at the note again, tracing the letters with her fingers. There was something about the way he wrote, steady, careful, kind. It was him. It had to be the man from yesterday, Keanu Reeves. He had read her message. He had seen her, and he had chosen to help without asking for anything in return. That kind of kindness felt unreal. People didn't just do things like that, not in her world. Not when most people barely looked her in the eye. But somehow he did. She sat on the step for a while, just breathing, letting the moment sink in. She thought of all the nights she'd gone to bed worrying about rent, food, or hospital bills. How many times she'd told herself she'd figure it out, even when she had no idea how. Now, for the first time in months, she felt like she could finally breathe again. When she walked back inside, she carefully folded the note and tucked it into her apron pocket. It was more than paper. It was a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. The rest of her shift went by in a blur. Every time someone smiled at her, she smiled back a little wider. Every time she poured coffee, she did it with a lighter heart. Even the jukebox, which usually got stuck on the same sad old song, seemed to play something softer that day. That night, when she got home, she placed the envelope on her small kitchen table and just stared at it. Her apartment was quiet except for the sound of the old fridge humming. She turned on the lamp, its light warm and soft, and sat down slowly. She pulled the note out again and read it for what must have been the 10th time. Then she placed it gently into a small frame she'd bought years ago at a thrift store. She set it beside her bed, next to a small sonogram photo of her baby. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle kicks. "Someone out there believes in us," she whispered. "So I have to believe too." Over the next few days, Emily's world began to shift in quiet ways. She paid her overdue rent, bought fresh groceries, and even picked up a few things for the baby. A soft blanket, a tiny hat, a small rattle shaped like a bear. Simple things, but they felt like luxuries to her. Her co-workers noticed the change. "You look happier lately," one of them said. "Something good happen?" Emily smiled. "Something kind happened." she replied simply. Mr. Brooks didn't ask questions, but she could tell he knew. Every now and then he'd give her an approving nod, the kind that said he was glad to see her smiling again. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about Keanu. She didn't want to bother him or make a scene, but a part of her wished she could thank him, not for the money, but for reminding her that she mattered, that maybe, even in her hardest moments, someone saw her and believed she was doing her best. One evening, after closing the diner, she sat outside watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and pink, the same colors she'd seen the morning he'd walked in. She smiled softly, remembering how ordinary that day had started and how extraordinary it had become. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. Maybe their paths had crossed for just that one moment in time, a moment that would stay with her forever. But that was enough. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Emily whispered a quiet thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the universe, to fate, to the quiet stranger who had walked into her life and changed it with one simple act of kindness. And miles away, in a quiet corner of Los Angeles, Keanu sat with a small folded note in his hand, the one Emily had written on that diner receipt. He read it again under the soft light of his kitchen, and for a long time he just sat there thinking. He thought about the strength it took for someone to keep going when life seemed impossible, about how a few honest words could say so much. And in that quiet moment, he decided something, that he wouldn't let this end with just one act of kindness. The story between them wasn't over yet. The city was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that made you notice every small sound, the hum of a streetlight, the soft whir of cars passing by, the whisper of wind moving through the trees. Keanu sat by the window of his small home, a cup of tea cooling beside him, the folded diner receipt resting on the table. He had read it again more than once, and each time, those few handwritten words touched him in a way he hadn't expected. He'd met many people over the years, but something about that young woman's note stayed with him. Maybe it was the honesty in her words, or maybe it was the quiet strength behind them. There was no request for help, no complaint about her life, just raw truth written by someone doing their best to survive. Keanu leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, beautiful yet lonely. He thought about how many people walked through their days unnoticed, carrying silent struggles no one ever saw. He remembered her smile, tired but sincere, the way she'd tried to hide her exhaustion behind politeness, and the way her eyes softened when she spoke. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. The next morning, he made a few calls quietly, discreetly. He didn't want any publicity, and that was never his way. He simply wanted to make sure she'd be okay, even if she never knew it was him. Meanwhile, back at the diner, Emily was having one of the best mornings she'd had in months. The world looked a little brighter now. She moved with energy, greeting customers with smiles that came naturally instead of forced ones. Even the regulars noticed. "You're glowing, sweetheart," one older woman said with a grin as Emily poured her coffee. "That baby's bringing you good luck already." Emily laughed softly. "Maybe so," she said. She didn't tell anyone about what had really happened. It felt private, something sacred between her and the kind stranger who had helped her when she needed it most. But that day, as she was wiping tables, two men in suits entered the diner. They didn't look like regular customers. They walked straight to the counter and spoke to Mr. Brooks quietly. He nodded and gestured toward Emily. She froze. For a moment, she thought she'd done something wrong. Her mind raced. Mr. Brooks called her over. "Emily, these gentlemen would like a word." Her heart pounded as she approached. "Is everything okay?" The older man smiled kindly. "Everything's fine, miss. We're here on behalf of a client who'd prefer to stay anonymous. He wanted us to deliver this." He handed her a sealed envelope and a small card. Emily blinked, unsure what to do. "Who is it from?" "I'm afraid we can't say," the man replied. "But he wanted you to know that it's genuine and that there's no obligation attached." She hesitated, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, short and simple like the last one. "This isn't charity. It's a reminder that you're seen. Use it to build the future you and your child deserve." And tucked behind the letter was another check, not as large as the first, but still generous enough to make her gasp. Her hands trembled. "I don't understand. Why me?" she whispered. The man smiled. Sometimes kindness finds the people who need it most. Emily covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears again. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She managed a soft, "Please thank him for me." The man nodded. "He'll know." They left as quietly as they came, leaving behind an air of mystery and a stunned silence. Mr. Brooks shook his head in disbelief. "You sure got yourself an angel watching over you, kid." Emily laughed through her tears. "I don't know what I did to deserve it." "Maybe you just reminded someone what goodness looks like," he said. That night, after closing, she sat in her tiny apartment surrounded by bills she could finally pay. But more than the money, it was the feeling that overwhelmed her. The feeling of being seen, of being valued, of mattering. She cooked a simple dinner, humming softly, and talked to her baby as if the child could already understand. "We're really going to be okay now," she whispered. "Someone up there must be watching over us." At that same time, across the city, Keanu was finishing a quiet dinner with a friend, a film producer he had known for years. The conversation was casual at first, but soon drifted toward life, struggles, and the people who often go unnoticed. "Most people just need someone to believe in them," Keanu said quietly. "Even a little kindness can change everything." His friend nodded, but there was curiosity in his eyes. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Keanu smiled faintly. "Let's just say I met someone who reminded me how much a small act can matter." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The following week, Emily returned to the diner after a short day off. She felt rested, calmer, and for the first time, she was able to look forward instead of worrying about what might go wrong. She'd even bought a new journal, planning to write about everything: the job, the pregnancy, and the stranger who had changed her life. But as she walked into the diner, something unexpected happened. Keanu Reeves was sitting at the same booth where he had sat the first time. For a moment, she froze in the doorway. It didn't feel real. She blinked, thinking maybe it was just someone who looked like him, but then he looked up and their eyes met. That same warm smile, that same gentle calm. Emily felt her pulse race. She walked slowly to his table, her voice trembling just a little. "You came back," she said softly. "I did," he replied with a kind smile. "I was in the neighborhood," she laughed nervously. "I don't think people like you just happen to be in this neighborhood," he chuckled. "Maybe not, but I was craving good coffee." Her heart warmed. She poured him a cup and set it down, trying not to let her emotions show. She didn't know what to say, but gratitude filled every corner of her heart. For a while, neither of them spoke. The diner was quiet except for the faint hum of the jukebox. Finally, she said, "I never got to thank you for everything." He looked at her for a long moment, then said gently, "You don't have to." "But I want to," she replied. "You didn't just help me. You reminded me that people still care. That kindness still exists." Keanu's eyes softened. "The world can be hard sometimes," he said, "but small moments of kindness, and that's what keeps it from falling apart." She nodded, tears welling again. "I wish there were more people like you," he smiled faintly. "There are. You just don't always notice them. Sometimes they're tired, or scared, or too busy trying to make it through the day. But they're out there, people like you." Emily blinked, surprised. "Like me?" he nodded. "You didn't have to write that note. You didn't ask for anything. You just spoke from your heart." That kind of honesty is rare. Her cheeks flushed. She hadn't thought of it that way. He took a sip of coffee and said quietly, "Sometimes we forget how much courage it takes just to keep going. You reminded me." For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu smiled back. "Take care of yourself, and your little one." Before she could say another word, he stood up, left a small envelope on the table, and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled softly as he left. Emily picked up the envelope and opened it with shaky hands. Inside was a note that simply said, "Never lose your hope. It's what keeps the light alive." There was no check this time, no money, just words. But those words meant more than anything else he could have given. As she read them, she realized something. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about faith, about kindness, about believing that even the smallest good deed could ripple outward and change lives. That night, Emily sat by her window, the city lights twinkling outside. She placed the new note beside the first one, framing them both. They weren't reminders of struggle anymore. They were proof of something beautiful. And far across town, Keanu smiled quietly as he read a message from Mr. Brooks, who had sent him a simple text. "She's doing fine. Smiling more every day." Keanu looked out his window at the night sky and whispered, "That's all that matters." Neither of them knew if their paths would cross again, but both carried something from that encounter. A reminder that in a world often too fast and too harsh, kindness still had the power to change everything. Emily woke up the next morning with a strange sense of calm. The usual anxiety about bills and the baby's future was still there, but it felt softer somehow, like a heavy weight had been lifted slightly off her shoulders. She stretched and listened to the quiet hum of her small apartment, feeling the gentle kicks of her baby beneath her hand. Each movement reminded her that she wasn't alone in the world, and that she had someone watching over her in ways she couldn't fully understand yet. At the diner, life moved at its usual pace. The coffee percolated, plates clattered, and customers came and went with the rhythm of ordinary life. Emily carried herself with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in months. When she smiled at someone now, it wasn't forced. It came from a place of genuine gratitude and hope. The regulars noticed the change. "You're different," one truck driver said as he sipped his coffee. "You're lighter somehow," Emily laughed softly. "I guess I've just had some encouragement." She didn't say more. Some things were too personal to share, even with the kindest people she knew. And besides, she didn't want to risk the story spreading in ways that would bring unwanted attention. A few days later, a letter arrived in her mailbox. No return address, just her name in neat handwriting. Her heart skipped. Could it be from him again? She carefully opened it and found another note. This one was simple, yet it carried a quiet power. "You're stronger than you realize. Keep going, and don't forget to believe in yourself." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just the words, and it was the thought behind them. Someone out there had noticed her struggle and had chosen to care. That realization was almost overwhelming. The following week, her life began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. With the financial help she had received, she was able to pay several months of rent in advance. She bought healthier groceries for herself and the baby, and even managed to pick up a few items for the nursery. A soft blanket, a few small clothes, and a tiny stuffed animal. Nothing extravagant, but enough to feel like she was preparing a safe, warm world for her child. One afternoon, while stacking dishes at the counter, Mr. Brooks pulled her aside. "Emily," he said quietly, "I wanted to tell you. The donations you received, the help you've gotten, word has gotten around. People are noticing your story." Emily frowned. "My story?" He nodded. "It's starting to get shared quietly among people in the community. They're moved by your courage and the way you've kept going despite everything. Some local journalists might reach out, but they respect privacy. I thought you should know." Her stomach tightened. The idea of her struggles being shared with strangers was frightening. "I don't know if I want that," she admitted. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Mr. Brooks said. "But know this, your story is inspiring people. They're seeing hope through you." Emily didn't respond right away. She looked down at her apron, thinking about the long nights, the worry, and the exhaustion that had marked her life for so long. And she thought about the quiet man who had shown her that a small act of kindness could ripple outward and change everything. Maybe, she realized, sharing her story wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about showing that even in the hardest moments, hope and compassion could exist. That evening, she returned home with a sense of purpose. She decided to start writing her story in her new journal, capturing every detail, the long shifts, the fear, the small victories, and the moments of unexpected kindness that had reshaped her life. Writing made her feel lighter, as if each word released some of the tension she had carried for so long. As the days passed, she continued her work at the diner, but the quiet momentum of change began to gather around her. The letters she received, always simple, always thoughtful, reminded her daily that she was not invisible. And with each passing day, she began to see herself differently, not just as someone struggling to survive, but as someone capable of resilience, courage, and hope. Then one afternoon, something happened that she hadn't anticipated. A local community organizer stopped by the diner, asking if she had a moment to speak. Emily was hesitant, but the organizer's gentle manner and warm smile eased her nerves. "I've heard a story about you," the organizer said softly, about your courage, your perseverance, and the kindness that came into your life when you needed it most. We'd love to feature it in a community newsletter. Nothing sensational, just your story as it happened. Emily's heart raced. She thought about privacy, about the idea of strangers reading her struggles. But then she remembered the letters, the quiet generosity, and the sense of hope that had been poured into her life by someone who didn't even know her personally. "Okay," she said after a pause. "I'll do it, I think. Maybe people need to know that hope exists." The organizer smiled. "Thank you. Your story will mean a lot to people." Emily spent the next few days writing and revising her story, keeping it simple and honest. She wrote about the long nights at the diner, the worry about rent and medical bills, the excitement of feeling her baby move, and the quiet miracles that had appeared in the form of letters and unexpected support. She didn't include names or details that might invade anyone's privacy. She simply told the truth. And in doing so, she felt a weight lift from her chest. When the article was published, Emily was surprised by the response. Letters began arriving from people in the community, some offering small donations, others offering words of encouragement. They spoke of how her courage and honesty had touched them, reminding them to keep going through their own struggles. One letter in particular caught her eye. It was short, handwritten, and unsigned, but the words felt familiar. "Keep believing in yourself. Small acts of hope can create big changes." Emily smiled softly, feeling a warmth that spread through her chest. She didn't know if it was from him again, but it didn't matter. The message was enough. Life began to feel less like a constant struggle and more like a path she could navigate with courage. The baby's movements became a source of joy rather than worry. She could finally imagine a future where she and her child were safe, cared for, and loved. Her coworkers noticed the change too. They treated her with more respect, asked about her baby, and even helped with small tasks when her back ached or she needed a moment to sit. It wasn't just the letters or the money that had made a difference. It was the confidence and hope that radiated from her, touching everyone around her. One evening, she received a call from a small local television station. They wanted to interview her for a segment on community heroes, people whose courage and perseverance had inspired others. Emily was nervous at first, but she agreed, thinking of the many people who might feel lost, alone, or hopeless. When the interview aired, Emily's story touched countless viewers. Messages poured in from strangers expressing gratitude, admiration, and even empathy. Many shared their own struggles, saying her story gave them hope to keep going. Through it all, Emily remained humble. She didn't seek attention or recognition. Her goal was simple: to show that even in the darkest moments, kindness and hope could exist. And somewhere, quietly observing from a distance, Keanu learned of the growing response to her story. He didn't seek credit or praise. He simply felt satisfaction, knowing that his small acts of kindness had set off a ripple effect that was now touching lives far beyond what he could see. Emily's life continued to change. Not overnight, but steadily. The financial support allowed her to focus on her health and the baby. She could now afford regular doctor visits, prenatal vitamins, and better nutrition. She started preparing the nursery with love and care, imagining the life she wanted to give her child, and safe, warm, and full of possibility. Through all of it, she carried the letters close to her heart, a constant reminder that even when life seems unfair, the world is capable of quiet miracles. And she knew one thing for certain: she would pass that kindness forward, in any way she could. The community's response, the growing sense of security, and the renewed hope made Emily stronger than she had ever been. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, preparing, and dreaming. And through it all, she never forgot the quiet man in the diner, who had shown her that even small acts of care could change the course of a life. Months passed, and Emily's life continued to grow brighter in ways she had never imagined. The small apartment that had once felt cramped and oppressive now seemed warm and full of possibility. The baby's movements were constant reminders of the life she was nurturing, and the love she already felt for her child was stronger than any fear she had carried before. Every morning, she woke with a sense of purpose. She cooked healthy meals, organized the apartment carefully, and made lists of everything she wanted to do before the baby arrived. It was a simple routine, but it brought her a feeling of control she hadn't had in a long time. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hopeful. The letters she had received from the quiet stranger continued to arrive every now and then, always brief, always kind. They didn't contain money or extravagant gestures. Just words. Words that reminded her of the power of hope, the importance of courage, and the value of human kindness. Emily kept all of them carefully, placing each one in a small box beside her bed. She read them often, tracing the letters with her fingers, feeling the quiet encouragement behind every word, even when she was tired, even when the world felt heavy. Those words reminded her that she was never truly alone. As the due date drew closer, Emily's thoughts shifted from her own struggles to the life she would soon hold in her arms. She imagined the baby's first smile, the tiny hands that would grasp her fingers, the soft coos in the middle of the night. All of it seemed both overwhelming and beautiful. One afternoon, as she was preparing the nursery, Mr. Brooks stopped by the apartment. He had always been a quiet source of support, and she welcomed him in. "You're doing great," he said softly, looking around at the small room filled with baby clothes and blankets. "I can see how much love you've put into this place." Emily smiled. "I just want to give him or her a good start. Something I didn't have when I was growing up." Mr. Brooks nodded. "You're already giving that. And you've done more than survive. You've inspired a lot of people, Emily, don't forget that." She felt a lump in her throat. I want to make sure my baby has a chance at a better life." "That's all? And you will," he said. "You're stronger than you know." Days turned into weeks. Emily could feel the baby moving more frequently, and the anticipation grew until the moment finally arrived. She went into labor in the middle of a quiet night. The apartment was still, the city sleeping outside, as she focused on the rhythm of her breath, the strength of her body, and the life about to enter the world. Hours later, exhausted but filled with joy, she held her newborn in her arms for the first time. The baby was small but healthy, with tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers. She cried softly, tears of relief and love streaming down her face. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking the baby gently. "I promise we'll be okay." Over the next few days, Emily adjusted to life with a newborn. The nights were long and tiring, but each cry and coo was a reminder of why she had worked so hard. She felt grateful, not just for the financial support she had received, but for the quiet encouragement, the letters, the acts of kindness that had reminded her of the goodness in the world. One morning, as she fed the baby, she noticed a small envelope slipped under the apartment door. Her heart skipped. Could it be another letter? She opened it carefully. Inside was a note, familiar in its gentle handwriting. "You've done it. You've brought life into the world and shown strength in the face of everything. Keep believing. The world is better because of you." Emily's tears fell freely this time, mixing with a sense of profound gratitude. The stranger had never asked for recognition, never sought thanks or attention. He had simply acted out of kindness, changing her life in ways she could never fully repay. The story of Emily's courage and the support she received eventually reached more people. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out with letters, small gifts, and messages of encouragement. Many shared their own experiences of struggle, telling her that her story had given them hope and strength. Emily read each message carefully, storing them in a special box alongside the letter she had received. Through it all, she remained humble. She never wanted fame or recognition. She wanted only to show others that kindness and hope could exist, even in the hardest moments. Months later, the baby was healthy and growing quickly. Emily had adjusted to the new routine of parenthood, balancing work at the diner with the demands of caring for her child. She found joy in small moments, the baby's laughter, the first steps, the quiet evenings together at home. One afternoon, as she walked through a local park with the baby in her arms, she noticed a familiar figure sitting quietly on a bench. Her heart skipped. She approached slowly, and as she drew closer, she realized it was him, the man who had first shown her kindness in the diner. Keanu Reeves looked up and smiled. It was the same gentle, calm smile she remembered. For a moment, neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. Finally, Emily said softly, I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "No thanks are needed. You did all the hard work yourself. I just wanted to make sure you had a little support along the way." Tears filled her eyes. "You changed my life. You reminded me there's still kindness in the world. You saved me." He looked at her and the baby, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you of what you already had inside. Strength, courage, and love. They sat together on the bench for a while, talking quietly about life, challenges, and the little joys that make it worth living. Emily shared the story of the letters, the community response, and how she had adjusted to parenthood. He listened carefully, never interrupting, letting her words flow freely. Eventually, Keanu stood, ready to leave. "You're going to be an amazing parent," he said softly, "and your child will grow up surrounded by love because of you." Emily held the baby close. "I hope so. I want them to have a better life than I did," he smiled. "They will. You've already made sure of that." As he walked away, Emily felt a profound sense of closure. She knew that their paths had crossed for a reason, to remind her of the goodness that still existed, to give her hope when she needed it most, and to show that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward and change lives. That evening, back at home, Emily placed the final letter in her special box. She looked around at her apartment, at the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib, and at the life she had created. The world felt brighter now. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of possibilities. She realized that she would carry this story with her forever. She would share it with her child one day, teaching them about hope, courage, and the quiet power of human kindness. And she knew that even if she never saw him again, the stranger who had first reached out in a small diner would always be a part of that story. Months turned into years. Emily's child grew strong and happy, surrounded by love, encouragement, and the lessons learned from a mother who had fought tirelessly for their future. And Emily herself continued to grow, finding joy in small moments, sharing kindness when she could, and remembering that even in the darkest times, hope could be found. She never forgot the letters, the quiet encouragement, or the man who had reminded her that she mattered. And every so often, she would think back to that first morning in the diner, to the simple act of writing her feelings on a receipt, and smile. It was a small gesture that had changed everything. Life was still challenging at times. Bills needed to be paid, the baby had sleepless nights, and the world continued to present obstacles. But Emily faced each day with a sense of hope and strength she hadn't had before. She knew that no matter what came, she could endure it, because she had already survived the hardest moments. And somewhere, quietly watching, a man smiled at the impact of a simple act. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need thanks. Seeing Emily and her child thriving was enough. Emily understood now that the world could be harsh, unpredictable, and unfair, but she also understood that kindness, courage, and love could tip the scales. She had experienced it firsthand. She had received it when she needed it most, and she had used it to build a better life for herself and her child. And so, with her baby in her arms and hope in her heart, Emily faced each day with the knowledge that life could be difficult, but it could also be beautiful. She had been reminded of the goodness in people, the power of small acts, and the strength that lives inside every human being. Her story, once full of struggle, had transformed into one of hope, courage, and quiet miracles, and she carried that story with her, sharing it in ways that inspired others, reminding them that even in the darkest times, there is always light. It was a life changed forever by kindness, a story of courage and hope, and a reminder that sometimes one small act can ripple outward and touch countless lives. Emily held her child close, whispering softly, "We are safe now, and we will be okay, always." And in that moment, she knew it was true.